Have you ever noticed how some people command attention and respect without saying a word? They don't chase, they don't explain, they simply withdraw, and suddenly everyone is scrambling to be near them again. It's not magic. It's the quiet power of pulling back, a skill most people never learn to use wisely. This isn't about playing games. It's about understanding a deep truth of human psychology. When you're always available, always responding, always giving your time and energy, people start to take you for granted. What's constantly present loses its value. But the moment you step back, something shifts. The dynamic changes. Those who barely noticed you before now feel your absence like a void. And that absence speaks louder than words. The people who once took your presence for granted start to question themselves. Did they push too far? The energy you once gave freely now feels earned, not expected. And that's when the real shift begins. It's like that moment right before you hit send, or the pause before you speak, a space more powerful than we often realize. It's the moment of non-reaction, the breath you take instead of the response you usually give. In that silence, something subtle but profound begins to unfold. What if silence was your strategy? We've been taught that strength is loud, visible, assertive. But the truth, silence rearranges the entire room. It unsettles the balance. Every dynamic feeds off energy. Starve it and it begins to collapse. Take something as simple as a group chat. You usually reply instantly, always available, always explaining, but then one day you don't. You leave the message unread, you don't explain, you offer no context, and suddenly people notice. Is everything okay, they ask. That's the power of pulling back, not out of spite, but out of clarity. It is the stillness that serves as a signal. They are aware of it. Your vitality drew some distance. You are no longer present. The power is rebalanced without a single word being spoken, and it happens exactly like that. There is no need to argue in order to demonstrate your argument. Validating your sentiments does not need you to provide an explanation for them. There are times when doing nothing at all is the most commanding thing you can do by yourself. There is a transaction that is taking place in the background of every relationship that you have ever had. There is a good probability that you are unaware that you were a part of it. There is more to it than just connectedness. It all comes down to that. Emotional access is provided. In other words, the version of you that people rely on. In order to provide solace, to respond to, is to take in, the one who fixes everything, that which calms, one who goes off at the right moment, and then apologizes in order to maintain the status quo. It seems as though you are simply being yourself. However, are you? Alternately, are you acting out the version of yourself that maintains the security of everything? Simply put, they are not making an effort to connect with you. They are making connections with the patterns you have, owing to the emotional regularity that you have ingrained into the relationship. They are aware of the moment when you will recoil, when you will give in. At what point will you make a joke in order to avoid the edge of the truth? It is not closeness at all. It's a form of programming. Additionally, the more dependable your responses are, the more control you voluntarily give up. Mainly due to the fact that emotional availability, when left unchecked, constitutes leverage. In some cases, not on intention. However, constantly in force. It is not connectivity when someone knows exactly which button to hit in order to receive a response exactly when that happens. This is the control. Right now, picture this. As is their custom, they will try to lure you in. Unfortunately, you do not react this time. There is no defense. There is no anguish. There is only quiet. Observe what takes place. One of them trips. The script unravels into pieces. To put it simply, you have broken the loop. You have effectively reclaimed your power during that little gap. As you can see, the thing that they relied on the most was not your affection. You were the one who reacted. In other words, that was the emotional money that they learned to consume. Additionally, the moment you stop reacting, your identity and the value you place on things begin to change. They do not believe that on your side, due to the fact that they do not fear your anger. They are afraid of your impartiality. If you speak, they will not be afraid. They have a fear of the silence that used to be the home of their strength. And once you have finished performing the role that they have cast you in, they are no longer aware of the person with whom they are interacting. That's good. That indicates that you are at last starting to meet the true you. Let's look at the truth. Your time is respected by the majority of people. No, not really. Your accessibility, availability, and usefulness are all aspects that they value. But what about your time, which is valuable, finite, and you will never get it back again? That is a less common consideration, because people have been educated by society to anticipate your energy in the same manner as a subscription service. What about you? It has been taught to you to automatically renew, all the time, at regular intervals, in every case absolutely, to the point where you never check to see if you still had anything to share. But here is the more profound reality. Your time is the cash that your soul uses. And every time you spend money on the turmoil of another person, rather than on your own alignment, you are going to be broke in ways that no one can see. Your evening is canceled by you. It was the one night when your nervous system begged you to give it some rest. Take a bath. For the book, the absence of reality, and in its place the phone is picked up by you. Once more drama, you make a nod. Space is held by you. You become more diminutive. When it is over, they experience a sense of relief. But what about you? Vibrating at a lower frequency is what you are doing. In exchange for proximity, you have given up your peace. Once more, realize that your body is energy. Every idea, feeling, and barrier that you establish or do not establish results in the emission of a vibrational signature. Happiness, lucidity, and self-respect are examples of high frequencies. Low frequencies, such as remorse, resentment, and depletion, are also present. Every compelled affirmation brings your vibe down, not in a figurative sense, but in a physical sense. You are in a very literal sense tuning yourself to the chaos pattern of another person. The more you do it, the more your field will adapt to your efforts. From that point on, you begin to attract people who anticipate that version of you. This is the version that is limitless and too available. In addition to this, they are completely unaware that they are engaging in this behavior. They are simply synchronizing themselves to the frequency that you have transmitted. There is, however, a spiritual trap here. You begin to believe that being drained is the same as being loving. This is an example of kindness giving up on yourself. That the act of being a martyr is a form of morality that is elevated. It is not the case. You are causing a breach in your alignment each time you give your approval to something that your soul did not agree with. Additionally, a shattered alignment evolves into a persistent imbalance from a mental, emotional, and even bodily standpoint. This is the end of a life that doesn't even seem like it belongs to you. In spite of this, the majority of people will not inquire about the expense of your presence for them. They will simply presume that you have anything to share. How come? Because we live in a culture in which people believe they have a right to your time, but make no effort to respect it. So let me remind you of that. For the sake of safeguarding your energy, you do not owe anyone an explanation. A permission slip is not required for your peace of mind. The frequency of your communication does not need to be lessened in order to help another person feel more at ease with their dysfunction. Emotional readiness is not something that you were born with. If you want to tune into the resonance of your soul, you were born to do so. In addition, here is the most weighty reality of all. There is a temporal limit on your presence here. By trying to make people happy, you won't be able to extend it. For every hour that you devote to harboring animosity, you will never get that hour back. There is no such thing as a limitless reservoir of maybe next time in your life. There is a current occurrence of it, this very moment. In other words, the question is not simply, who are you attempting to keep? Additionally, what aspect of yourself are you sacrificing as a result of this process? What would happen if you stopped asking? If I were to say no, would they still love me? And continue to inquire, will I continue to love myself if I continue to say yes? Mostly due to the fact that your body's not meant to be worn out. It is here to grow with you. Also, you cannot grow by decreasing your size. By recognizing the frequency of your truth, regardless of how inconvenient it may be for other people, you increase your circle of influence. Allow them to adjust then. Alternatively, you could let them go. Are you? Because you have a life to live, an experience that is truly similar to your own. Having an excessive amount of availability is one of the most subtle ways of self-erasure. The reason for this is that when people appreciate what you have to offer more than who you are, it gives the impression that you are closer to them. One that has a warm sensation on the surface, yet is hollow right down to its center. You are present. You are in favor of. It is you who calms the chaos. Also, for a brief period of time, it seems to be a link. On the other hand, something more subdued lies underlying that transaction, a more unsettling aspect to consider. There is no one holding you back. This is the function that they are holding, and it's possible that you've become so skilled at being helpful that no one has ever had to question who you are in spite of all the assistance you've provided. Presumably, they were unaware of it. You might not have done so either. This is how things get started. In the beginning, it appears to be love. Feelings of appreciation come to mind. It takes the form of trust. However, this is not love, it is usefulness. When you perform the position of the savior for an extended period of time, people tend to forget that you have wounds of your own at that time. As a result of your value being discreetly and softly linked with your silence, you have wounds that you have never addressed. Let's not mince words. Despite the fact that you didn't believe you were lovable, without being required, you ended up becoming indispensable. And this is the more profound truth that the majority of people try to avoid. Not because they are unable to relate to it, because once you give it a name, you are forced to face the fact that you have been living in the performance for a very long time. A misunderstanding of identity is what Jung would term this situation. A separation of the self into the persona, the mask that you have built in order to negotiate the expectations of society. The creation of it was not the result of manipulation. Protection was the source of its birth. You were able to adjust in situations where sincerity was perceived as risky, when gentleness was disregarded, and when your genuine voice was deemed too disruptive to be accepted. You responded to the world with what it deserved: your expertise, your willingness to be loyal, and your availability. So the mask continued to be worn. However, as time went on, that mask ceased to be considered an accessory. It was built into a prison. You had stopped replying to my messages. The rehearsal was going on. You were never able to connect. You were giving it your all, keeping your relevancy in the market, keeping your position in place, keeping your place in the lives of people who only noticed you clearly when you were meeting a need is an important aspect of maintaining your image. You are currently at a point where you are unsure of where your usefulness ends and your identity begins. However, this is the bit that nobody ever discusses. Once love is intertwined with practicality, quiet transforms into a potential danger. The absence of movement raises suspicions. There is a sense of defiance in rest. Because if you are not actively demonstrating your worth by your work presence and service, then what are you? And that is the horrible question that you have been trying to avoid answering. That is because beneath all of that activity, there is a soul that is terrified of what will occur when you eventually stop doing it. What can you do if the calls also stop? What if they move slightly? It is here that the contradiction lies. You continue to give in order to prevent that probability, and by doing so, you ensure that it will not occur. This is due to the fact that the more you teach people to place a higher value on your service than your substance, the more your essence will become invisible. And this is the point at which the soul begins to break apart. This should be brought into the world of energy, shall we? When you begin to offer your emotional labor as a form of identification, you will notice that your energetic field begins to expand. However, you become less accessible to yourself as you grow more open to other people. Through the use of fragments, you give away your bandwidth. A response here, a fix there, a shoulder, a call, and a rescue, all the way up until the signal of your own frequency becomes weak and unstable. The problem is not that you do not exist. The reason for this is that you have gotten more difficult to identify within its own life. If you make your usefulness your money, then this is what you will experience. You refuse to stop giving it out until there is no more money left over to spend on your own requirements. And by the time you regain your composure, you find yourself encircled by others, to a great extent by oneself. You taught them to love the mask not because they failed you, but because you taught them to adore it. This was a very kind act. However, you were also full of fear. Fearful of letting down the customer, afraid of being a typical day, fearing that if you stopped being outstanding in what you gave, you would become forgettable in who you are. You would cease being extraordinary. However, love is not the same thing as usefulness. It's simply the self-abandonment that is the most socially acceptable form of the behavior. On top of that, here is what Jung would say. Over-identifying with your persona for an extended period of time will cause your shadow to become more prominent. The aspects of yourself that are worn out, irritated, resentful, and exhausted. They do not end up being lost. They amass in quantity. They are waiting. In the end, they were brought to light. Please do not be destroyed. However, if I were to question you in a gentle manner, what would be left if you ceased performance? There is a limit to your resources. Pretending to be someone else is a slow and painful sort of soul death. You are deserving of being loved even when you are at peace, within your no, in your lack of speech, in the absence of you. Individuals that only appear for the version of you that is able to solve problems are not considered to be your people. Those that remain with you when you are resting are the ones who are able to observe you. Those individuals are the ones who restore the safety of love. Now please accept this invitation. Remove the mask from your face. The performance should be canceled. Additionally, see who stays and who truly cares about you. It is not to punish. However, in order to safeguard what is still available, with the purpose of regaining the aspects of yourself that were never required to be one in the first place. It is not your purpose to serve as a burden. You are not available to be reached whenever I want to. To continue to demonstrate that you are important, you are not here. You are here to live your life to the fullest, the imperfection, and without apology. Those individuals who are able to hold that, your decision to discontinue providing does not pose a threat to them. As soon as you begin to be grateful, they are grateful, given that this is the point at which the genuine connection starts. In not what you do, but in who you are as a person. Once the performance has reached its conclusion, it is not always the case that your strength will lead you to loud and dramatic exits. More often than not, it escapes in a stealthy manner. The gradual drip-bleed of emotional overstimulation, along with unregulated reactions, petty fights and triggers that are not deserving of being triggered to anger. In the beginning, you are not aware of it. Since it has a sense of righteousness, it is justified, instantaneous. Online, you argue for hours defending a position that you have forgotten you even cared about in the first place. 5 paragraphs are sent to a person who has never shown any interest in reading them. The next morning, you find yourself rehearsing a confrontation that has not yet taken place, and by lunchtime, your chest is tight and your brain feels like it is filled with static. You then question, what is the reason for my gloomy feeling? How come I feel so exhausted? Uncomplicated is the response. As a result of every overreaction, your internal system experiences a power outage. This was something that Jung recognized long before social media transformed every thought into a performance. In his view, the mind was not a repository of thoughts, but rather a live current that flows through it. An energetic system that is continually managing where attention flows, where emotion is directed, and where power is either leaked or maintained. To add insult to injury, when you act on impulse without pausing or reflecting, you are diverting that energy away from your higher function. The noise is what you feed into the system, not the signal. Your shadow rather than your center is the one that you empower. Reactivity is a sensation that is similar to motion, however, it is typically merely motion sickness. And the reality that the majority of people do not like to confront is this. Even if you are correct, you might still win. After winning the argument, getting the last word, and destroying someone's logic, you may still feel exhausted, bewildered, and alienated from the outcome of the situation. How come? Due to the fact that the energy you contributed was not an investment. There was no return on the emotional investment that was made. Reacting does not result in increase in power. You can increase your influence by selecting something which is worthy of a response. Moreover, this is where the discipline comes into play. Your feelings are a form of currency. When it comes to feelings, the word emotions says it all. An emotion is a form of energy that is in motion. Each and every reaction is a buy. It is either that you are purchasing a more profound self-alignment, or that you are paying for a transient affirmation that will result in long-term tiredness. Emotional discipline is not simply a lack of warmth. Conservation is the term. Refusing to let people who have not earned your intimacy or your effort to take control of your nervous system is what it means to be an independent person. Leaving talks that are merely there to satisfy someone's need for confrontation is what it means to walk away from them. Remaining mute in the face of provocations is what it means. for the simple reason that you have nothing to say. On the other hand, you are aware that they will not hear it regardless. Recognizing that not every invitation to fight is worth attending is an important step in this process. Some are snares that are camouflaged as conversation. There are those that are voids that absorb whatever light that has thrown themselves into them. This is the point at when everything becomes crystal clear. In order to avoid reaction, it is not necessary to conceal the facts. In other words, it involves honing your expression. Having the ability to sense everything while transmitting selectively is a requirement. Acknowledging and respecting your emotional world without transforming it into a form of public currency. In light of the fact that not every aspect of you is intended to be revealed. Not all emotions are designed to be expressed to the outside world. There are certain things that are intended to be observed by you in silence, without there being either applause or opposition. This is the core of what it means to have mental sovereignty. To have reached a point when you no longer require the outside world to affirm what your inner world already possesses. However, this is not the way that the world is organized. This is an economy that is based on attentiveness. Also, attention is dependent on the ability to react. The greater your level of engagement, the more you react. As you get more involved, your energy will be harvested to a greater extent through the use of algorithms based on ideas. A group of unhealed individuals who are hunting for emotional targets. Consequently, you are required to break the loop. You need to develop a sense of restraint. Approachable, even so. Now regain your concentration. Verify that you are responsive. Remember to hold your fire from the locations that are solely interested in destroying it. It is important to keep in mind that you are not here to be constantly provoked. You are here to undergo a transformation. To undergo a transformation should protect your energy as if it were very necessary for your progress, because it is the case. In addition, there are very few instances that are more defining than the split second that follows the occurrence of a trigger. Once the words finally hit, it becomes more abrasive. To take a peek, it is a gesture, just a pause. Instantaneously, your entire body begins to brace itself for the collision, and you are able to sense it. This is the surge of blood, a constriction that occurs in your throat, a burst of heat that is located behind your face. As soon as you try to stop it, your jaw begins to tighten. The narrative then begins to unfold. The people do not respect me. They are attempting to bring shame onto me. A word is necessary for me to utter. If I am to defend myself, I must. This surge of the mind is not a sign of weakness. This is the past. It is a memory that is stored within the body. It is a younger version of you that is emerging in milliseconds, and it is deeply convinced that if you do not take action right now, you will be diminished, erased, and made little. This is how we respond. In a hurry, violently, to a sharp degree, from an emotional standpoint. But if you are prepared to take a moment to pause and fight against the force of the reaction, you will start to understand something that is significantly more significant. It is not the threat that is the trigger. There is a teacher who is the trigger. It does not support the notion that you are unstable. It's a signal that points to the things that continue to exert influence over you, not the one who is currently in front of you. This is not the current circumstance. However, the untreated wound that they only lightly touched. It is the discomfort that the majority of people try to avoid. It is an intolerable realization that the adversary is not present in the world. There is a vulnerability therein that has not been examined. This internal disarray was a topic that Carl Jung frequently discussed. He was of the opinion that a substantial confrontation with the shadow was necessary in order to arrive at the complete realization of oneself. The part of your psyche that is concealed and buried beneath the persona is referred to as your shadow. The darkness is speaking to you through triggers not to humiliate you, but to let you know that there is something in this place that you have neglected and that it is time to bring it back. Nevertheless, that is only possible if you remain. Stay out of the argument altogether. Hold on to who you are. This is the kind of discipline. When your neurological system is screaming to shut down, lash out, or escape, but you are still mindful of what is happening. For one to experience everything without becoming the feeling itself. The ability to see the increase without taking it for the truth. The ability to acknowledge that you are in the presence of your own edge and to make the conscious decision not to give in to it. mainly due to the fact that mastery is not the lack of reaction. The capacity to meet your reaction with sufficient awareness to determine the extent to which it is your own and the extent to which it is inherited, conditioned, inherited, or automated is what it means to have this talent. You have broken free of the spell when someone criticizes you and you feel your body getting ready for battle. But instead of fighting, you breathe, you observe, you contain the charge without spilling it everywhere. And because of this, you have stepped out of the spell. Currently, you are not being moved by the moment in any way. You are not moving with it out of a sense of compulsion, but rather from a point of centeredness. The contrast between reactivity and sovereignty can be summarized as follows. To react is to have a reflex. The response is the sovereignty. The other is centered on survival. Self-reliance is possessed by the other, and certainly it is challenging. It is necessary for you to experience the same thing that you have spent your entire life trying to avoid. A feeling of helplessness, abandonment, invalidation, and betrayal. It doesn't matter what the underlying wound is. The trigger will locate it. If you allow it to, the trigger will take control of your life. However, if you are able to learn to sit with it, to sit with the shame, the anger, and the rejection for a sufficient amount of time to see it, you will be able to remove its power. Because of this, you are no longer a slave to the pattern. As the witness, the container, and the presence that carries the charge without becoming the explosion, you are the witness. And in that one instant, you recover something that no more validation from the outside world could ever give you. To choose. The decision to either speak with intent or to remain silent on the matter. The decision to either maintain control of your center or allow it to be taken over by another. The decision to act in accordance with instead than reacting to something. Mostly due to the fact that it is unavoidable to experience feelings of arousal. However, it is not necessary to let that trigger to determine your reality. That is not to say that you will never be influenced. It is about being conscious enough to realize when your old wounds are steering the ship and aware enough to correct the situation so that you may take control of the situation. This is the actual task that needs to be done. It is not about avoiding confrontation or pretending that you are healed. Rather, it is about practicing presence, especially during the times when it is the most difficult to hold it. It is not necessary for you to engage in every conflict that brings back memories of your past. It is not necessary for you to communicate your value to individuals who are determined to completely misinterpret it. There is no requirement for you to equal the intensity of the provocation. There are times when doing nothing is the most radical thing that you can do. There is no resistance, no performance. There is only silence. That stillness that communicates, I am aware of who I am. That is not something that can be decided by this, simply because genuine power is not loud. A true power is one that is steady, measured, and unaffected by the noise that used to make you feel unstable. It is at this point that you come to the realization that the trigger is no longer under your control. So you are. By no means is that avoidance. It is evolution in action. In addition, if you want to determine how truly free you are, you shouldn't look at how you feel when things are going well in your life. When you are provoked, take a look at the person you become. The reason for this is because the road to sovereignty is not filled with flawlessness. This is something that is constructed in the fire with the breath that you take when you would rather yell the silence that you choose when you have the ability to dominate, and the inner stillness that you construct when everything in you wants to break. When you do this, you will meet yourself. In this way, you can regain control of the situation. When people stare at you, you undoubtedly notice that they are not seeing you at all. This is something that you probably detect. The version of you that they are seeing is not the result of presence or inquiry. Rather, it is the result of projection. It is a collection of unresolved stories, unfulfilled desires, and concealed anxieties that are masked as expectations. If you have spent your entire life being affable, accommodating, or emotionally fluent, then it is likely that you have become the ideal screen. You did not become a member of the group because you requested it. Rather, you became one because survival taught you to conform to the desires of others before you even realized what you required. You were taught at a young age how to detect the environment, how to anticipate, how to absorb, and how to balance. Having the ability to read between the lines, avoiding disappointment, and gaining intimacy by becoming whatever it is that they require you to be are all key skills. In addition, it is not love, rather it is a demonstration of value. The reason for this is that when people interact with their projection of you, they are not connecting with your being. Rather, they are relating to your utility to the image of you that confirms their worldview, to the version of you that does not disrupt their fantasy, and to the archetype that they have cast you in to soothe something within them. You take on the role of the person who is helpful, the one who is strong, the one who is calm, the one who is reliable, and the one who does not require much. In addition, the relationship seems to be successful so long as you continue to act the part. On the other hand, the moment you make a change when you become quiet, rather than reassuring when you refuse to accommodate the energy shifts abruptly. Having broken the projection, you are no longer simple, you are no longer handy, and you are no longer easy. It is also possible that your honesty will be interpreted as a form of treachery in institutions where your conformity has been misconstrued as character instead. The reason for this is not that it is unethical, but rather that it constitutes a challenge to the equilibrium of control simply because it reveals the reality that the connection was not truly reciprocal. In other words, everything was conditional, and it was dependent on your capacity to remain within the frame. It was Jung who taught us that projection is a process that occurs unconsciously. People tend to project aspects of themselves that they are unable to embrace onto other people, such as their wounds, their idealizations, and their guilt. They do it without any prompting. It is also possible that you will confuse being idealized with being loved if you are not aware of this fact. This, however, is not the same. The reason that projection is based on need is because love is founded on knowing. The first one frees you while the second one needs your obedience. Not only does projection provide the risk of misrecognition, but it also poses the risk of psychological erosion, which happens when your identity is reduced to a single dimension because of projection. When you enter the emotional economy of another person, you transform into a symbol, a role, and a function. And this is where the manipulation begins to take place. When you remain in the role, you are commended. When you make a self-sacrifice, you are validated. When you remain silent, you are rewarded. And when you comply, you are admired. The same individuals who once liked you become chilly, passive-aggressive, critical, or even hostile the moment you reclaim your time, energy, or agency. This is because they begin to view you as a threat. When they do this, they label you as selfish, altered, or ungrateful, and they remove their affection in order to steer you back into position. However, this is not because you have done something wrong. Rather, it is because they have lost control of the character that you were cast to play. And many individuals who are aware of that transition fold. As a result of the fact that the loss of belonging, even a false sense of belonging, can be more terrible than the loss of one's own identity, they retreat back into the script. There is, however, a moment at which you come to the realization that maintaining the performance is significantly more expensive than leaving the stage. This realization typically occurs after numerous instances of emotional weariness. When this happens, the mask is removed off the face. As soon as you step out of the projection and give yourself permission to become unrecognizable, to those who have only ever loved the concept of you, you will have completely changed. And certainly it is possible that they will depart. On the other hand, another thing takes place. The projection fails to materialize. As a result, the manipulative dynamic is no longer present. For the reason that manipulation needs predictability. Your consent is required regardless of whether it is silent or conditional. Your willingness to carry out your responsibilities, even if doing so causes you to lose your peace of mind, is essential. However, the moment you stop performing, you become unpredictable, not in a volatile sense, but in a sovereign way when you stop performing. There is no longer a way to read you through the lens of their history. You are no longer moldable through guilt, and you are no longer malleable when you are under pressure. Moreover, this new version of you, the one who does not automatically say yes, the one who does not sell boundaries for belonging, this version causes those who were never seeing you properly in the first place to get disoriented. However, this state of disorientation is revered. This indicates that you are no longer acting out a role. Being a person, a whole multidimensional, emotionally honest being that no longer contorts themselves in order to remain digestible, is what you are growing into. This is hardly an act of defiance. Reclamation is what this is. You have not come to this place to be understood. You are present in order to be observed. People who are unable to, or who refuse to do so, have never connected with you. They have only ever connected with their projection. Therefore, allow the roles to fall. Allow the applause to die down. Allow yourself to let go of the version of yourself that lives solely for the comfort of other people. And in its stead, let something that is more subdued, more authentic, and significantly more potent emerge. The version of yourself that disengages from the process of erasing yourself. The version of yourself who no longer worries about being misunderstood. You who would rather be accepted for who you are than revered. It is you who is liberated. When it is chosen with awareness, silence is not the same thing as retreat. A reclamation is what it is. Jung mentioned in one of his writings that anything that bothers us about other people might bring us to a better understanding of ourselves. However, he was also aware that not every dispute is worth engaging in, particularly when the confrontation is intended to stimulate your reaction rather than your development. Whenever someone makes an effort to entice you by means of criticism, distortion, or performance, they are frequently not engaged in any type of communication with you. The image that they have projected onto you is the one that they are speaking to. In addition, if you respond without being aware of it, you are just confirming the role that they have unconsciously set you in. Yes, it is the snare. The silence dispels that enchantment. The loop is broken as a result. It does not attempt to retaliate against the manipulative dynamic. Rather, it meets it with absence. The place where reaction used to reside was now an energetic void. Therefore, the projection is compelled to collapse under its own weight as a result of this absence. It is for this reason that individuals who wish to exert control find quiet to be so dangerous. Their narrative does not have a co-author because you did not participate in it. There is no objective in their strategy. The anchor for their projection is absent. There is no spiritual bypassing involved in remaining silent while your buttons are being pushed off. This is the mastery of one's feelings. It is the process of individuation and flux. Jung's method for describing the process of being whole. It is necessary for you to break free from the roles that have been assigned to you by other people and to fight off the impulse to give into reaction just because the narrative necessitates it. As for the stillness, it is possible that it is misconstrued. Someone might describe you as icy distant or avoidant. Allow them to misidentify your own clarity. In addition, that is a component of their pattern. You are not here to be reshaped by the discomfort that they make you feel. It is not via speaking that one can acquire a specific strength. Rather, it is through remaining still for a sufficient amount of time to perceive properly. The lucid silence that one experiences is not the silence of defeat or withdrawal. It is the noise that comes from being awake. A mind that is no longer racing to protect, correct, or perform its duties is characterized by silence. When someone is able to comprehend that not every time requires articulation, they will continue to remain silent. The observation of some is required. There is a rare clarity that exists in the gap between the trigger and the response. But in order to claim it, you must be willing to halt for a sufficient amount of time. Mostly due to the fact that when you speak too rapidly, you fail to recognize the delicate architecture of the moment, but you fail to notice the glimmer in their eyes. The word that they were on the verge of saying, but ultimately chose not to. The inconsistency between what they publicly declare and what they actually practice. Even more essential, you fail to notice what you have a tendency to ignore. Your own usual responses and behaviors. You will only be able to perceive the bigger picture if you maintain your silence. The game on which the gesture is based. What lies underlying the apology is the pattern, as well as the reverberation of manipulation that is masked as concern. What Jung would refer to as the beginning of the individuation process is found here, possessing the ability to differentiate one's own awareness from the projections of other people, with the purpose of beginning to differentiate your essence from your conditioning, putting an end to the persona that other people have established for you. Also begin the process of becoming the person you were created to discover. When you are continually speaking, especially during times of emotional intensity, you are frequently not speaking from presence. This is especially true when you are speaking, according to the programming you are speaking, from the reflexes of childhood, from the logic of trauma, based on the archetype that you were instructed to do by another individual. Silence, however, that cycle is broken by being silent. You will go from being a participant to a witness as a result. And the act of witnessing in its most unadulterated form is the first step toward liberty. You can regain the energy you've wasted attempting to control narratives that were never yours to manage by simply observing what is going on around you. Stepping outside of the emotional transaction and beginning the process of decoding it is the goal. With lucidity and composure to inquire not about how I should react, but rather about what is actually taking place here. To put it simply, there is always a more profound dynamic, a truth that is more profound. Moreover, the majority of it is concealed in plain sight, but only if you are calm enough to see it. As soon as you stop reacting, you will begin to become aware of how frequently someone's tale starts to change in order to cast blame on you. In what ways is a casual comment actually a test of one's emotions? How a seemingly innocuous question can conceal a habit of control. The absence of sound serves as your viewpoint, one that is elevated above the haze of performance and the discomfort of it. There is no question about dominance here. The issue is one of sovereignty. There is no longer a requirement for you to interrupt lies. You allow it to elucidate itself, mostly due to the fact that people reveal their methods when you are silent. They reveal their own identities. They overemphasize their sentences in their writing. They are too quick to seek justification for their actions. You are finally able to view things clearly now that you are no longer involved in the transaction. And that sight is not limited to the outside world. It is also a turning inward. You become aware of your own nervous tics while there is silence, a desire to be liked by others. Your concern that you will be misunderstood. You have a propensity to dwell on details. It has come to your attention that your voice has been utilized rather frequently to defend boundaries that you might easily impose simply by being present. Mostly due to the fact that this is the paradox lucid quiet. The less words you utter, the more prominently you are perceived. After that, by other people, and ultimately by yourself. Regaining your pace can be accomplished by opting for observation rather than reaction, for the purpose of liberating yourself from the confines of your emotions and regaining control of your own center. And it is from that center that you become aware of something that is uncommon. It is not necessary for you to win the conversation. Stop acting in it. That is all that is required of you. The narrative does not require any corrections from you. All that is required of you is to remove the energy that was preventing it from taking place. The act of ceasing to indulge in the falsehood is what constitutes lucid quiet. Having the ability to say more with silence than 1,000 rebuttals could ever hope to do. For the reason that, when you speak out of reflex, your truth is watered down by the sense of haste. However, when you see before you speak the words you choose to say, or the choice you make not to utter, have accuracy, weight, and direction. And with that, the first steps of the psychic economy are taken, with regard to emotional control, characterized by a force that is both subtle and irreversible, the ability to exert authority over another individual. On the other hand, the ability to ensure that you are never again dragged away from yourself by a person who does not merit the privilege of holding your attention in the first place. The absence of sound enables one to gain clarity. Additionally, when completely embodied clarity is indistinguishable from strength by any means. If you tell your truth, however, it may not necessarily be empowering. On occasion, it can be exhausting. When your words are heard by ears that aren't truly listening to them, this is especially true. We frequently believe that sharing is always the appropriate thing to do, that if we express ourselves in a manner that is sufficiently clear, we will be understood, that if we talk to others from the heart, they will react with care and consideration. On the other hand, the reality is that not everyone is prepared or eager to take in what you disclose. It is possible that if you reveal your truth to the incorrect people, you will experience feelings of being misunderstood, frustration, and isolation that are even greater than they were before. When you talk about your requirements, your limits, and your path, you are providing more than just knowledge to the other person. This is a piece of yourself that you are offering, and there is a price to pay for that. Sensitivity, mental clarity, and vulnerability are all essential. The question that arises then is whether or not you are putting your voice where it matters. Or are you spending it in a way that is causing it to be wasted? It was Carl Jung who warned against the peril of divulging aspects of one's personality to individuals who only perceive you through the lens of their own preconceived notions. In other words, they are not attending to what you have to say. Their own experiences, presumptions, and anticipations are influencing their hearing, and they are listening through that lens. Even if you say something that is crystal clear, it won't be able to reach someone whose mind has already been made up about who you are. For this reason, explaining oneself to people who consistently misinterpret what you are saying is not communication. Rather, it is just damage control. You do not owe anyone a full and detailed explanation of the decisions that you have made. Your limits are not something that needs to be justified. It is not necessary for you to defend your tranquility to someone who is benefiting from your perplexity. You have the ability to choose which truths you let in. The focus here is on safeguarding your vitality. Knowing when to speak and when to simply keep your clarity in silence is an important part of maintaining clarity. It's not safe to have every conversation. Not all listeners are capable of doing so. At the same time, not every moment is intended for publicity. This demonstrates emotional maturity. Understanding the difference between when your truth is being sought for out of love and when it is being extracted out of control, you begin to become aware of the frequency with which you over-explain in order to maintain the status quo. How soon you are willing to compromise your standards in order to be heard. Your feelings of exhaustion from sharing with people who never really get to see you in person. That brings us to the transition. In situations where you are not respected, speak less. Be honest and open about where you are. A filter can be created by your quiet. Allow your presence to convey what the words themselves do not need to say. And have faith that people who are actually capable of receiving you will not require a performance in order to comprehend the truth within you. Mostly due to the fact that when you stop giving away your voice to those who have never earned it, you do not become more difficult, but rather become wiser. And you start to speak in a manner that is consistent with someone who is aware that their words carry weight. Becoming aware of your limits is not the same as being able to maintain them. Just because you are aware of your patterns does not mean that you can alter them. It is necessary to be more aware. However, if action is not taken, it will become yet another method to impede growth. You can spend an infinite amount of time studying yourself and still not make any different decisions. Keeping oneself in one's brain and analyzing rather than acting is a simple task. Despite the fact that you tell yourself that you are working on it, you are aware that nothing will change unless your conduct becomes different. The only time when meaningful transformation may begin, according to Carl Jung's writings, is when consciousness meets responsibility. The point at which understanding ceases to be theoretical and begins to shape how you conduct your life. Being aware of the fact that people-pleasing stems from fear is not sufficient. You must be able to feel the terror and still refuse to do it. Simply stating that your tranquility is important is not enough. You are required to allow the phone to ring. You need to stop explaining your choices to people who never pay attention to what you have to say. The bridge that connects who you were and who you are becoming is the discipline that you have. And at first it will feel awkward, and it can even feel like it's not right, mainly due to the fact that your neurological system is still tuned to the previous routine. When you do halt, however, make the decision to prioritize presence over performance and silence over apology. You are rewiring other aspects of your behavior as well. This is a step in regaining your self-respect. Forget about striving for perfection. Practice is the key to success. More conversation is not required regarding your truth. More embodiment is required for it. Therefore, examine yourself in an honest manner. Are you living what is true, or are you doing what is safe? Because contemplation without action is the same thing as avoiding. When insight is not accompanied by change, it is merely another cage. Take baby steps. Don't cross the boundary. Listen to the sound of silence. Allow the phone to ring up. This is the point at which healing ceases to be a notion and instead becomes a choice. Being alone yourself may be a terrifying experience, particularly if you have always based your sense of value on the relationships you have, the roles you play, or the amount of space you take up in the lives of other people. We have been taught that being alone is a sign that something is wrong. They believe that we have failed in some way if we are not surrounded, included, or continually connected to others. However, what if that is not the case? Imagine for a moment that being alone is not a form of punishment, but rather the beginning of something significant. In the course of your life, you will eventually reach a moment where you begin to feel exhausted by your own performance. When you really want to say no, you find that you are saying yes instead. You go to places that do not provide you with nourishment. Even if it disturbs your peace of mind, you continue to smile, nod, and comply. Additionally, it's possible that you've been doing that for such a long time that you've forgotten what it's like to be yourself when no one is looking. The concept of sacred seclusion comes into play here. Isolation is not the same thing as shutting people off or creating walls. Rather, it is a kind of distance that you create on purpose in order to remove yourself from all the commotion and regain the ability to hear yourself. Initially, the silence may feel oppressive, foreign, and even lonely to some people. However, hold on to it. This is due to the fact that beneath the agony lies something uncommon, your authentic self. Carl Jung, a prominent psychologist, discussed the concept of the persona, which he referred to as the mask that we all wear. This is how we navigate life, how we fit in, and how we function. But if you wear the mask for an excessive amount of time, you will eventually forget what is underneath it. It is necessary to remove oneself from the crowd for a period of time that is not indefinite, but is sufficient to enable you to recognize the aspects of your personality that were formed by fear, approval, or habit. This pause is defined as sacred seclusion. It's when you stop performing, when you stop being the person that everyone else expects you to be, and when you start remembering who you are when no one requires anything from you at all. You start to take pleasure in being by yourself. In the face of obligations, you opt for relaxation. You are able to say no fearlessly. You reflect on the fact that you are not lonely, but rather at peace while you sit in solitude. In addition, something significant takes place from that location. Instead of basing your life on the expectations of other people, you start to rebuild it around your own truth. You no longer look for validation on a regular basis. You give up the pursuit of feelings of closeness that leave you feeling void. Beginning with what feels honest, even if it is quiet, and even if it is small, you begin to choose accordingly. As a result of the fact that sacred seclusion does not result in disconnection, it completes you utterly. Pulling away is not always the same thing as rejection. Remembering is the key. Here we are reclaiming. It's like coming back to a familiar place. As soon as you do that, you will no longer look for yourself in other people. At all times, you are carrying yourself. Everywhere you look. It's possible that letting go will feel like mourning. It is not always a loss, but rather a release that occurs. You are not saying farewell to something wonderful. Rather, you are seeking a peaceful exit from something that was slowly and subtly breaking you down. When we put some distance between ourselves and another person, our initial reaction is frequently guilt. There are times when we wonder if we are being unjust, overly sensitive, or overly frigid. Please take a more in-depth look. Inquire the truth of oneself. Are you experiencing grief for the deceased person? Or have you finally reached a point where you are detoxing from the havoc that they entered your life? It's not true that every connection is beneficial. There are some that are exhausting, unsettling, and even addictive. Because of this, you feel accountable for their feelings. As if you were walking a tightrope, you modulate their levels of mood. Rather than leaving talks plain, you make them more confusing. When it comes to depth, it is simple to confuse that intensity. However, emotional turbulence is not the same thing as proximity. Instability dressed up as intimacy is what it is. In addition, removing yourself from the situation does not cause you to become chilly. This makes you more clear. It's possible that you won't notice this delay until it's over. On the other hand, you will feel it one day when you have put some distance between yourself and the person who has constantly pulled you into their tempest. Harmony, not the kind that is dramatic, one who is reserved. To quit overthinking, you must. Your chats are no longer being rehearsed. Stop attempting to mend something that was never meant to be carried by you. And at that point, the truth comes to light. Exactly what you dreaded losing was the thing that had been preventing you from moving forward. In the words of Carl Jung, until you bring the unconscious into the conscious realm, it will control your life, and you will refer to it as fate. Emotional disorder, if not addressed, can develop into a pattern that we consider to be normal. When you take a step back and allow yourself some space, however, you are able to see things for what they truly were. A vicious cycle, not a link. Distancing yourself emotionally does not mean that you cease caring. It means that you let go of the things that cause you pain. The issue is not about constructing walls. Establishing boundaries is the focus here. These are the kinds that safeguard your vitality, your clarity, and your development. It is possible that at first it will feel as though something essential is coming to an end. The version of you who believed you needed to continue to be in agony in order to maintain your connection is, however, the one that is ending. Power is the next step in the process. As soon as you stop relying on people who cause your nervous system to get confused, you will begin to trust yourself once more. The quietness of your inner world persists. The steadier your thinking is, the lighter your heart is. There are instances when what appears to be a loss is actually just clarity occupying space that was before occupied by turmoil. Give it a chance. When you quit providing your energy to things that deplete you, something goes through a transition. There is a return of a calm power. It is neither forceful or spectacular, but it cannot be denied. It manifests itself in the way that you walk, the way that you speak, and the way that you retain space for yourself without requesting permission. This is the process of the self being reborn. It is not the self that you constructed in order to survive, nor is it the self that you put on in order to be accepted, but rather the self that sits underlying it all. In its entirety, truthful and unaffected by the cacophony. You can't create this version of yourself by adding more. You discover it by subtracting, extracting your energy from things that drain it, removing your focus from roles that are not true to you, and allowing things that have died to pass away. Stopping to settle is the first step toward rebirth, not only in your professional life or romantic ties, but also in the way you talk to yourself. How you deal with disrespectful behavior. Because you have been accustomed to the pain, you are able to rationalize the things that bring you discomfort. You started to realize how much of your life was molded by dread that was disguised as something else. The fear of being too much, not enough, misunderstood, or abandoned is a common fear. And as soon as you stop feeding that dread, something new starts to develop, a sense of self that does not seek, perform, or explain itself. Idiomation was the term that Carl Jung used to describe this process. The manifestation of your most authentic self, not based on the person that the world has portrayed you to be, but rather on who you are when all the noise is removed. This reborn self does not require affirmation in order to take action. It is not able to shrink in spaces that are unable to contain its reality. Being alone is not a form of punishment. Rather, it is a form of preparation. And that limits are not obstacles. Rather, they are the avenues via which a new identity might be born. Yes, there will be a great deal of sorrow, bereavement for the person you were destined to be, owing to the roles that you played, and for the years that you spent shrinking yourself in order to maintain the status quo. However, once the release is over, what emerges is something precious, a version of you that is founded on completeness rather than approval to others. Instead of being able to cope, you begin to create. You start attracting people rather than asking for them. Instead of providing an explanation, you begin to become. You have ceased concealing the signal, and those others who resonate with this frequency will discover you since you have stopped hiding it. The reality is that rebirth does not always produce the sensation of a breakthrough. There are times when it feels like nothingness, nearly like shedding. This is similar to finally stating, "I do not want this anymore," and having faith that something more desirable will eventually take its place. It will, in fact. When you stop directing your energy toward the wrong places, you not only reclaim your power, but you also reclaim your power. The energy is redirected into healing, clarity, and a life that is more in line with your values. This is the version of yourself that you wanted to meet all along. It is not an improved version, it is simply the original. Now that you have decided to reject settling, you are finally prepared to live your life as they do. In the event that this resonated with you on a profound level, if you have reached the point where you are no longer willing to shrink, explain, or settle, then let this to be the beginning of your comeback. I send out a free weekly newsletter filled with grounded, thoughtful insights, much like what you've just read. Each edition is crafted with care, designed to reconnect you with your truest self. You can sign up by clicking here. And if you're walking this path with me, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. If you're done settling, if you're ready to act, speak, and choose from your wholeness, not your wounds, drop the words "I knew" in the comments. When you're ready to go deeper, explore the full playlist. And if you've ever dealt with two high-demand individuals, I'd love to hear how that experience shaped you and how your life changed once you began teaching from your own truth. Guard your energy, honor your inner knowing, and above all, move like you're already free. I'll see you again soon.